I think possibly the first thing you'll notice is that the title of the presentation doesn't actually match what's just been said. I think when I was talking about this presentation, I think even I confused myself with that title. So this is a little bit simpler. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carolyn McKenzie. I'm, as I said, Director for Environment at Surrey County Council, but I also chair the Environment Board at the Association of Directors of Environment, Economy, Planning and Transport, which looks at a lot of the place issues at a national level and works with government to see how it can fit in with things like devolution. And I think the idea of this presentation is that there's a lot of change at the moment, and it's to provide that almost light at the end of the tunnel, that there is something or could be something beneficial at the end of that change. I'm talking about devolution. I am going to particularly avoid talking about LGR, so it's just on devolution today. In the past, devolution deals have very much focused on deals and on growth and on economy. The government's key mission is growth, and I think there's a fear that environment may well slip between the cracks if we don't somehow try and make sure we've integrated our priorities within those missions, or that we are blamed for stopping growth. So I started off with that point because I frequently, having worked in environment for most of my career, the amount of times I've been variously called a tree hugger or an activist or stopping this or stopping that I just thought I'd address that up front. Will environment stop growth? Is that going to be the blocker for the government's mission on growth? Possibly. Possibly. Oh, a nightingale. I do like nightingales. But for me, I think that's, and I was about to say, a bit of a red herring, but I think we're forgetting and asking the wrong questions. I think there's going to be a lot of other things that will stop growth or could stop growth or could inhibit growth. Climate change, for me, is probably one of those key ones that we haven't really understood how that's going to impact things. Energy. Do we have enough energy to actually support this growth? Having tried to develop a number of renewable schemes in Surrey and in Kent, I'm not sure entirely we do. So I think that's going to be a bit of an inhibitor that we're just waking up to. Flooding. We could build houses in the floodplain, perhaps. So I think flooding linked to climate change and linked to not enough water. So too much water, not enough water, dirty water, I think are all going to have an impact on growth. And the last one is green space. Surrey is obviously the most wooded county in the country. It's got some beautiful green spaces, but do we have enough green spaces in the right areas to enable development? So it's a complicated picture around enabling growth. In my view, we need to change the conversation, and I don't know whether any of my floods team are still in the room or had to go. Oh, there's one at least. This is my positive example of where we try to mix agendas and get multiple outcomes. It's not a planning example, but it shows where you could potentially start making those links. This is Horsell Common. Originally, part of it was a protected area. The other half was empty. It had antisocial behaviour. It got wet. There was a lot of flooding. There was a school route that went through it that was very boggy and used to be inaccessible at particular times of year. So the floods team looked at it as a potential for flood storage above Woking, so a flood scheme. But instead of just looking at it from a flood scheme perspective, they took a view of looking at it from the whole. So out of that piece of flood work, huge amounts of water are stored, so protecting from flooding. They have created a new access route for the school, a new green space, which is beautiful, and also planted quite a number of trees, so the carbon and biodiversity impact is actually quite significant, and not too big a price tag for that. So it's demonstrating that you can have things next door to each other and living side by side. And I think that's the conversation we need to be having, is how do we enable growth and nature and environment to live side by side and be integrated, using all of our space, blue, green, grey, as best as possible to achieve our outcomes. An opportunity. As I said, I'm not talking about LGR here, but I do think devolution is absolutely an opportunity. Katrina talked about the spatial development strategy earlier on. That allows us to take that strategic view to really look at what we need across the piece and how it all works together and look long term. So I think absolutely it is an opportunity, and it allows us to start looking at more consistent policies that could influence a wider area, and to start getting some consistency, which may help support the development agenda and make things a little bit cheaper. So yes, I do think it's an opportunity, and it's an opportunity to simplify things as well. And we already have a really good framework in place. The government introduced the 25-year environment plan, not this government, the government before, and then out of that came the Environment Act and then the government's Environmental Improvement Plan, all from the previous government. This government has adopted this approach, and they've had it under a rapid review for the last 3 to 6 months, and I've been very privileged to be involved in that process in part of the steering group. And what was absolutely apparent is there is quite a big gap between local government's understanding of what local government and local areas can do, because at least 2 departments assumed that we were already delivering and had core funding for quite a lot of that, and climate change as well, and net zero. That was already in our budgets. And I had to kind of say, well, actually, no. And if the budgets go down, or if demand goes up for certain services, this will drop off the list. So DEFRA is very keen to look at how environment and leadership on the environment, and that's everything from flooding, adaptation, local nature recovery across the piece, how that can be delivered more effectively and managed more effectively at the local level. So, it seems quite a while ago now, when the first county deals were being discussed, we started the conversation with government about trying to simplify the approach to environment. Anyone that works in environment and also as planners will know that there is an absolute plethora of policies, strategies, funds, position papers, that it makes it really complicated sometimes for organisations to work in that sphere, but also in the development arena as well. So the one thing that we settled on is that there was this need for a clear evidence base. So where is all the evidence? What is the evidence? How do we bring it together in a more collective format so we can prioritise more effectively? And then we can use that to talk to government about, these are the priorities in Surrey. We have this, but we don't have that. We want to focus on that, but not that. So we can have that conversation with government and say, could we then, down the line, I know, and a bit of a nirvana, start talking about block funding for environmental improvements that then start to get that scale. But it's also really useful at a planning level in terms of being able to link all the different sources of information, not having them all in one big tome, but just knowing where they are and how they link through and how the different data sets work together, including where the water companies have got environmental data as well, and other companies. So that was the basis for county deal, and the government liked that approach. It changed later on because obviously, and the key elements, just to give the key elements which are there. So that's how it all links together. So it looks very complicated, but in essence, it's quite simple. We have a lot of evidence. How do we bring that together? We have a lot of strategies. How do we bring them together so we can see how they fit together? So we can get an integrated approach and then use that to define what we need to do to map the opportunities, the risks, the hotspots, and to identify a portfolio of projects, whether that's land-based, people-based, or initiatives to be able to lobby government. And that brings in existing policies, national policies, and also local policies as well. So government were keen, and the second government came in, or this government came in and ratified that they wanted to carry on with our county deal. There were a few complications along the way when it came to, well, what's the difference between a LEIP and a local nature recovery strategy? And there's quite a lot of conversation around that. And we eventually came to the conclusion with DEFRA that we're talking about the same things, and that what DEFRA want to do is, and for want of a better word, build on the local nature recovery strategy to be able to expand it, to be able to start bringing in other issues and to act as a LEIP. So that's where we are now. And if you look in the government, like the devolution white paper, you'll see a paragraph which basically says, want to build on the local nature recovery strategy and develop an environmental leadership role for local government, which is as broad as saying that bit at the end of a job description that says, and anything else that the director wants you to do. So it's quite broad and needs to be a little bit more specific, but the hook is there. However, and I'm sure you all know this, it's a really busy marketplace around environment. So the demands for ecosystem services, whether that's for access, for BNG, and can they live side by side? I think in some cases they can. Whether that's carbon, whether it's, as I say, public rights of way or biodiversity, energy, renewables, the demand on green, blue space is huge, and the demand for eco-services is huge. And what we need to ensure is that we're effectively using this land, so stacking, which I saw earlier on, which is great, but getting multiple benefits out of the environment, both human and for place and for planning, that we get the best out of it. But there is an issue around that because we don't know half the data. We don't know where everything is, we don't know what we've got, and how it all fits together. So the opportunity or the problem that may arise is what happens when there's conflict, and how do we feed this into the growth agenda, and has it live alongside the growth agenda, and how do we avoid duplication or unintended consequences or conflicts? And as if the government heard what we were saying a few years ago, they came up with and I'm going to say this, we were talking about a land use framework way before the government said a land use framework. And they've now got the land use framework consultation out, and what that will allow us to do is do exactly that, to look at what we've got. It's focused on green, it's focused on ecosystem services, but the view appears to be that they want it to work alongside the spatial development strategies and provide that green element, so that then it allows that integration across the SDSs. And having that information in place, and having a local land use framework, because the government's approach has changed from having a whole load of maps, which when I first started engaging with government, that's what they were going to do, to having principles, which is fine. It builds on the better connected, bigger, better and connected, and other issues working together, working in partnership, sharing data, which is really good. But it then kind of puts that over to you in the local area, and how do you then deliver that? Which is fine, because it fits very well with the idea of a LEIP, but it's land-based. And to be able to do that, to be able to look at, map, do the GIS mapping, around what we've got will help us, hopefully, to look at where we can do natural flood risk management schemes and get the most out of those, where we can have BNG and be able to look at that more into the future, and map what the requirements are for major projects coming forward as well. So we can really start to have an early conversation about what the demands are going to be. And I'm hoping that, although it seems like a really difficult, complex, tricky proposition, hopefully by starting this process we can start to get a bit of clarity on how we use our natural capital within Surrey. And that's my positive end, that we could get to a point where we are getting multiple benefits from everything we do on land, and that we achieve more than the sum of the parts. No, the other way around. Okay, thank you. Stay up here or down? Just stay here, man. See, that's bamboozled you at the end of the day.
Hi, Carolyn. Do you see a role for the SDS in terms of sort of allocating land for nature that's linked into the land management framework or the land use framework as well?
Absolutely. Having talked several times to Katrina about this, it was very much, because I went in with the paranoid, well, you're going to have an SDS and it's not going to look at where we need stuff from an environment side. And the LEIP and the LMF, which is the kind of more spatial element of the LEIP is more about the evidence and the databases, is very much, or will hopefully be very much, a key component or a key evidence base for the SDS, and it'll help us to draw other strategies in, so that flood strategy, climate change strategies, all the other strategies together, so a more coordinated approach.
While you're going over there, I'll just ask a question, if I may. Do you think this is a good opportunity as well to look at connectivity between nature and people, and how that can be put down spatially so you can reconnect Surrey, in effect?
Absolutely, because you've got to see, being in a meeting last week, we see nature, but you need to see the people side, because if you don't see the people side of nature, then they won't own or value what's in front of them. So yes, I do see looking at what we've got and making it easier for all sections of the community to access green space, especially those that don't have access to any green space at the moment, or it's too far out, or it's not good quality. So yeah, I think it's a real, and one of the key conversations I'm having is with our health team, public health team, around the wider determinants of health, and how a poor environment, but also how an environment that is subject to flooding or, heat island approach can be really detrimental on health. So how can we use the environment to support improvements for those communities? So yes, I do see it. And also from, if you look at it from a much wider perspective, so mapping our public rights of way, there are a number of gaps in our public rights of way that they don't connect up, or they're not quite as sensible as they should be. And there's ways of changing that through the public rights of way improvement plan we've got going through at the moment, of looking at where that then corresponds to poor air quality or to lack of access to services, and improving those routes so that people have more access via walking or cycling.
Good, thank you.
Hello, it's Catherine Bart, who you know. I asked a question earlier to Jack about public access, and I'm just thinking that the district and borough councils and the county council all have public land. I'm thinking, for example, in Reigate and Banstead, there's Earlswood Common, and Earlswood Common, because of the funding for borough for all councils, it's really tricky for the borough council to do lots of nature conservation on there. And I'm just, do you see any opportunity for the councils or council in the future to use their land for biodiversity net gain credits, so the developers are paying for improving the public, but it is public land still with public access?
Yes, I do. So when I first started out on this, and it was right at the very beginning of when I started at Surrey, it was very much on the basis because we had a tree target of 1.2 million trees, which is quite tricky in a very wooded county. And we also had some of the highest visitor numbers in places like the Surrey Hills, so it's bringing that together. So that's the reason we started looking at across the piece, because we were also looking at renewables and solar farms across Surrey. It starts to get a little bit complicated, so we changed the focus to just on SCC's land, and have now mapped our land and started to overlay what we can put on them. And one of those first layers was BNG and what could be done for BNG, and also what could go alongside that. So where we've got land that in an area where we may have flooding, could we use our land? And we visited an area a couple of weeks ago where we've just discovered a piece of land that is above an area that floods, that we could use as part of the catchment approach and use that to collect water that will start to alleviate down. So yes, absolutely, looking at our land, and I completely agree with you, public land for public good, and having a process through the mapping and the evidence base to be able to say, well, that piece of land could be used for X, Y, and Z, or it could be used for housing, or it could be sold off, so that you've got a really positive way of making a decision. And in some cases also a positive way of saying, okay, so we've got a honey pot site over here where we get lots and lots of visitors, and we've got a piece of SCC land or someone else's land. Could we create something that it starts to take some of the pressure off some of the well-used areas of land? So yeah, I see it as a really good way of, I hate the term, but sweating the asset and getting the most out of those assets. And I think it also gives us an opportunity to not challenge, but to look at things like BNG and does it have to be totally isolated and no access, or what's the level of mix you can get, and what's the level of mix between urban areas, because you get wildlife in urban areas, and they live side by side. So it's how do you do that? This better not be a complicated question, John.
Thank you very much. No, I promise it won't be complicated. But just given the fact we talked a lot about identifying of resources, but we haven't really talked much about protection of those resources once we've identified them. And I just wonder where the commitment to protect 30% of the land by 2030, I just wonder where that fitted in the jigsaw.
Yeah, no, it does. And again, that was one of the purposes of the land management framework, which now the approach has passed through Cabinet, which is good. It took about 2 years, but it's got through. And that is very much looking at, okay, so which bits of land do we absolutely need to protect? And how do we identify that? And how do we put it in place? And what do we need to do to be able to ensure that protection? I think that's an fully answered point, but I think that is definitely one of the principles is to identify where it has to be over there by itself and protected, or it can be mixed in, or it can be integrated. And I think the SDS may well start to help that. How that comes through the planning system, I'm not a planner, so I don't know as yet, but I think it's a question that we need to be asking. But I think if we start with the approach of where are we allocating different bits of infrastructure, and therefore, if we're doing that over there, can we protect that over there? Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
If there are no more questions, thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you.
And I will just move, sorry, yes, please.